I would say we have to begin to take on the serious challenge of first admitting to ourselves that we're in and on a Hollywood set. In a way, it all looks progressive and productive because you have big buildings, you have neon signs, you have all these accoutrements that suggest to you, we're really getting somewhere. We're really making progress.
So, first question is, one, how did it feel to be installed as a chief? Like, what was the process like? And then, what led you to want to be installed as a chief?
Those are very, very intriguing questions with long answers. I must admit that my first interest in chieftaincy I got from reading. Most things you get from reading if you're readers, because you learn there's questions that are presented to you, even though you hadn't anticipated the question, but you realize there's a question for you. And at the time, I had finished my rites of passage training. I was in Cleveland interested in starting an organization that would focus on the development of Black people. And I anticipated that this endeavor would cause problems for me because there would be people that would push back on this and I would have to be constantly defending myself. So in reading, I read the story of Prince Hall and the Masons and learned that in his effort to establish Masons in the US, he got no support in the country. So he had to go outside of the country to get permission to start a lodge. That gave me the idea that if I was a chief, I would have the ability to fend off these people that would come after me. So my idea of chieftaincy originally was to give me protection against people. It had nothing to do with what I might do as a chief. It was only to use it as a shield and basically say to people that came after me that I'm on a special mission from another country, leave me alone. That was my reason initially for wanting to be a chief. Thereafter, because Nana has made reference to it, so it's an easy segue, I contacted my then teacher, who was a Ghanaian, Dr. Anthony Mensah, who was living in Milwaukee, but he was a Ghanaian from Aguafo, I think. And so to pursue my defense, I asked him whether he thought I could become a chief in Ghana. He said he never heard of anything like that, but he would check and see. So in his checking, this is kind of how the ancestors work or spiritual things work. In his checking, he was advised to contact Nana Eduakwa IV because he was an educator, I was an educator, and they thought that he would be the proper person to put Dr. Mensah in touch with for my question. So Dr. Mensah contacted Nana Eduakwa IV. He told me he didn't know if this was possible, but Nana Eduakwa was open to talk about it. So I asked him what would be the next step. He said, well, the next step would be you invite him to the US or you come to Ghana. I said, I'm coming to Ghana. So I came to Ghana. I stayed with him for a week at his house. He hosted me. I had other people with me. He hosted them in Elmina at the family house. And during the course of spending a week with him, I realized that I couldn't do the chieftaincy work. My idea of a shield was fine, but as I saw what the role of a chief actually was, I said, I can't do this. So before I was scheduled to leave, I admitted to him that he had given me material to study for my chieftaincy. I was going to be installed and outdoor at Panafest. And he gave me these things to study, and I was terrified because I already knew that I couldn't do this. So I admitted to him that I'd have to relinquish this quest because I couldn't do this. And we were seated in his living room at his house. There was a book on the table. I later realized that the title of the book was Khan Protocols. He picked up the book. He said, you don't have to do this by yourself. He said, this lady right here will help you. He showed me the book. I reached for it. He took the book away. I never touched it. He put it back on the table. So he encouraged me not to give up. So I was convinced that I couldn't do this, but he seemed to be convinced that I could, and I didn't have to do it all alone. And so I didn't want to disagree with him, but I have pretty much dismissed the idea. So I went back to the U.S. Having learned what I had learned, I met with my students and co-workers about our rights program and told them that we've been misdirected because there's a whole dimension of rights, a spiritual dimension that we were not aware of and were not focusing on, and without it, there's nothing we can do, really. So I said, we're going to have to rethink what we're doing, do it in a different way, or forget about it, because we're not heading anywhere actually. So a weekend or so after that, 2 of my students went to New York. They met a lady that had traveled to Ghana with me, who I didn't even like. She was an annoyance on the trip. She was never satisfied on the trip. She was never on time on the trip, but they ran into this lady. And they were discussing that I was back from my trip, and I told them that we'd have to change the rights because there's a whole spiritual dimension that we don't know about, and therefore we have to, what we're doing is bogus to a certain extent. And this lady gave them, she said, what are you talking about? There's plenty of practitioners here in the States. He said, oh, really? But Dr. Whitaker said there aren't any. So this lady, who was not one of my favorite people, to put it mildly, gave them 3 websites. She said, well, check out these websites. These are people that's doing this thing. So they brought that list of websites to me on a napkin. I said, well, I'll check them out. So I went home and I got to my computer. I put them on the desk in front of me. And one of the websites was almost calling to me, try me, try me, try me. So I typed it in, and the first thing that came up on the website was a picture of the book that Nana Aduaquata IV showed me. I called this lady immediately. I sent her an email. I said, we have a mutual friend. He's just transitioned. He said you were going to help me, so when do we get started? I was so excited. That's what I said. Response came back, who is this? What mutual friend? How did you get this number? And that was my introduction to Nana Chittiwa. And so it's Nana Chittiwa that's actually responsible for my installation. So we've been working together ever since. And I only recently found out, in this continuous flow of people and connections and energy on this path, because it's like a path that you're on. You don't even realize you're on a path until you start to see things that just have no other explanation. And what Nana Aduaquata didn't mention, that connects this link, this chain, this long chain that we're talking about, it's Nana Aduaquata IV that was mentoring Nana Duakwa V, just like your dad is mentoring you for something that he may know what he has in mind, but you don't. So Nana Duakwa V tells me he was realizing that he was being prepped for chieftaincy all this time. Nana Duakwa IV took him to meetings, took him to places. He's just there as a young person. Look, he doesn't know why he's there, but once he gets his opportunity to serve, he actually knows everything about what needs to be done because he's lived it. So I've just found out that Nana Duakwa IV started the school inside Elmina Dungeon. And the issue that we are having today about the restaurant in the dungeon was started by Nana Duakwa IV as a cafeteria for the students in the school. And that school that started in the dungeon continued to grow and ultimately became Edniaman High School and UCC University.
Wow.
Just from this small thing that keeps on growing and magnifying. And so that's how the chieftaincy started. So once I was feeling less intimidated by it, I said, well, maybe I can do this, especially if I don't have to do it all by myself. And I've always been a person that wants to do something that nobody else has done. And if I could do it, it may represent something that's not just ordinary. I kind of got that notion from a tape that John Henry Clark said. He said he'd rather do something meaningful than to go across the street and do something ordinary. So I'm always thinking about what could be done that would establish something as a new dimension to our quest to become ourselves. So even if it seems far-fetched or if it seems very, very, very unlikely, I'm willing to try to do it on the hope. It's like a three-pointer at the end of a basketball game. So if you missed a shot, so people say, well, it was a long shot to begin with. But if you make it, it's something, it's like it's happening now. Mm-hmm. So I'm willing to try to think through and make the long shot and get with other people that makes the long shot not quite as long. So that's kind of the incentive and the journey towards chieftaincy.
Considering where you are now, I would say you made a switch.
Yeah, so it looks like at least we scored before the half. So the rest of the game is still to be played.
Yeah. That leads us to our next question. How do you support education and youth development in your area?
Well, that is a question that requires a challenge. It's very challenging. And it's an ongoing progression. When Nana Duakwa and I first started, we started to focus on education because the student performance in Atonkwa was deplorable. Nobody could pass the BECE. And I said to Nana once, I said, I'm an educator. So to have students in the village that I'm supposed to be affiliated with that can't pass the BEC is kind of embarrassing. So it's Nana Duakwa, myself, and Professor Owusu, who was current, at that time, he was on the faculty at UCC. But the three of us organized a BECE prep program that we conducted in the community center. And we met with the students beforehand, the students that were going to take the BECE. and asked them if we had a program at night to prep, would they come? They were somewhat lukewarm about it. We said, well, why wouldn't you come? He said, because we don't have food. So that's why we don't come to school all the time, because we don't have food. So we said, if we provided food, would you come? So we bought the cooking utensils and had people, and they created the menu that they wanted. We purchased the utensils, we purchased the food, we had it prepared, and they came and we came, and at the end of that prep program, 13 of the students passed the BECE, which was the biggest number.
That's remarkable.
So we knew that this was doable. So that led to direct involvement with the school to see how could we strengthen the school's program through supporting Nana Chittiwa's computer lab, so the technology would help us. I would bring what I could from my school in the US. So everything that we didn't use, I would ship here. So the computer lab became the highlight of the school in terms of technology. Mm-hmm. And we brought whatever we could get our hands on, whatever our school didn't use or we could replace, I sent the old things here. So over the time we had, for the past 3 or 4 years, the students' performance went from 36% to 42% to 70% to 80%. The last results might even be higher than 80%. So we now are convinced that we can produce students with achievement and performance levels that can meet these standards. So I've moved on to something bigger than that, which Nana and I talk about all the time. I'm not happy with the colonial foundation of the education. Mm-hmm. So to me, even if you get 90% of something that's irrelevant, so it's 90% of something that's irrelevant. So now to work at addressing that requires taking on the entire educational structure mm-hmm. that's set in certain ways. And once something's like clay, if you're making something out of clay, you can keep on working with it until the clay dries. Then you have a problem. So in this context, some of the clay is dry and it's hard to make it do something different, mm-hmm. which is why I wanted you to go across to see the space. Yeah. Because this is space that's our space. So we can do programming there to perhaps challenge and encourage a different perspective on what we're saying, because we don't have to deal with any politics there. Yeah. We can, this is our building, our program, our space, and anybody that comes there can take advantage of what we're talking about. And if it challenges what you currently are learning or augments it, that's for you to determine. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to be concerned with what we can or cannot do. So that's why I wanted you to see that. So because of the notoriety that has come to the village, this idea was not totally ours, but when we built the building, we always wanted a science lab there that we figured would bring people from places for the science lab. Mm-hmm. But we couldn't develop the science lab because we didn't have the resources, and always something else required attention. But because of the notoriety of the village performance and the computer lab, see, lots of groups come here to be in that computer lab for basic computer training, keyboard work, or just to avail themselves of it. I haven't seen it, but we understand that in many respects, that little computer lab up there is better than the one at UCC. Mm-hmm. So people always come. So the government approached us, unbeknownst that anything was even happening in this regard. They approached us because they wanted to establish a science center in the region someplace. And Atonkwa had been selected to be the science center because it had a facility that could be used. And also they identified Atonkwa to be recipient of a library grant, only because of the buzz that has developed over time. So the lady that was in charge of the local science outreach committee came to us about putting a science lab over here. She had some science equipment and she wanted to get started right away. And we met with her, she sat right there, and her colleague was with her. And she described what she wanted to do, when she wanted to get started, and we told her that we don't actually work like that. We want a science lab that's going to actually be a legitimate science lab. And you're talking about starting some experiments or something in the existing facility that we don't consider that up to the caliber of what we would do. So she tried to press us to consider this an emergency, but we never did, because we said, you know, we have standards about how we want to do things. So just because you want to have a science program doesn't mean that it meets our standards. So we got a grant. What you see today, we got a grant for $5,000. We did that work with the $5,000. Of course, my personal office, I supplemented that because it was going to be my personal office as well. But we've been promised additional funding. They have small grants of $5,000 a year, so we've been promised we'll always get a grant. So we'll finish the rest of the rooms with this next $5,000, which will come in December, and we may augment it with other money, but we'll keep working towards the actual science lab that we want, and determine what to do in these other rooms. One's an office, and one might be for whatever programming you have, tech stuff or audio visual podcast or something. But so that's what we'll do. And so I'm trying to emphasize the reality that things are connected in ways that you don't notice. But if you become very, very observant, you'll begin to see how things that appear to be unrelated are actually related, and they're linked from one to the next. So once you can see that happening, you kind of know where you're going, and you can see how you can accelerate the process. And you've got someone that's helping to provide opportunities for you to see all these things. So the journey becomes a little bit easier because you can see your allies, who they are, what they do, how they can help you, vice versa. So that's a long answer to maybe a short question.
Oh, we appreciate it very much. To talk about the space, what led you? You have many achievements, of course, but one of your achievements in this community is building the first two-story building, which is the community center. So what led you to start this project of yours,
Okay. So I can't take credit for that because it was not something that I was consciously doing. But during my installation, there's a sequestration period. So I was confined to this house in this room for a period of a day and a half before my outdooring. And during that time, I was visited by priests, elders, heads of family to talk with me about my role, about expectations. And at the end of their visits, which most of the time I didn't know what they were talking about, but my parting phrase to them was, if you had a magic wand and you could make anything happen, what would you want to see? Every one of them said a community center. So I just filed this information away. But when the outdooring came for my installment, I was taken up the hill on the way to your space. Where you get to the top of the hill, you turn and there's a little monument in a field there. It's a Catholic location. That's where I was taken the morning of my installation. Before day, I was taken there, and the ladies came to dress me for the program and everything. And so then I came down that hill where it's almost impassable but you can still get up there. You go past the nurse's station, up the hill, turn left towards where you live. So we came down there. Both sides of the road were filled with people. All the way down, I was in the palanquin, all the way down, people were cheering and drumming and they were going crazy. And it was like Mardi Gras, and I was the only thing in Mardi Gras. So we get to the fairgrounds. By the time we got there, I was so excited about what's happening that this was amazing. So when it came time in the program for me to talk, I had heard all this community center, and my installation was right out here. The building just wasn't there. It was all vacant land. And so I got a chance to talk, and the people were all crowded around. Women, men, young people, the whole village was there. People came from every place. And I was so excited that I announced, without even thinking about it, that I was going to build a community center. The people went crazy. They absolutely went berserk. It was like the second coming of Nkrumah or something that they were just, and so I felt overwhelmed and excited too. They were excited. And afterwards I left the country and I forgot all about that. And in my book, you've read this story.
Yeah.
Nana contacted me by email a couple of weeks later. He said, well, I assume you made it home okay, because nobody advised me that you died or the plane crash or anything else. So I assumed you made it home okay. And I'm thinking, what is he talking about? He said, by the way, the elders would like to know, when is the community center going to get started? I wasn't even thinking about community center.
Yeah.
That's the last thing on my mind. I said to myself, I've forgotten all about this. You still talking about that? That took place at the installation. I'm done with that.
Yeah.
So you know the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So in my book, it's entitled The Dance. Because Nana's trying to find out, when is this thing going to get started? And I'm trying to basically stall him and say, look, forget about that. We're not talking about that anymore. I just said that. I don't know why you're preoccupied with this. You're serious about this. So the ironic thing is, everything I asked Nana that I made as contingencies, I was just stalling. But he took them serious, and they were serious things I needed to have. So he provided me with this stuff, and it never delayed things like I was hoping it would. So I finally had to admit to myself, either you're a fake, a liar, and a fraud, or you're going to have to get some money, and you're going to have to go there and start this thing. Yeah. So rather, I said, well, I'm not going to voluntarily be considered as a fake and a liar and a fraud. So I'm going to take whatever funds I got, as meager as they are, I'm going to take them there, and if it never gets finished, nobody can say I didn't start. Yeah. Then I'll make up another excuse for why I didn't get finished. And one thing led to another, and every time we reached an impasse, something came to help jumpstart the process again until it was all done. So that's how I got the idea. I just said what people had been saying to me, not even seriously meaning it. So that part of that story you already knew.
Yeah. So, do you have any closing thoughts or call to action for young people across Africa?
Oh, sure. It's a difficult thing too, but it's not just across Africa. It's everywhere on the planet. Whether on the continent itself, the continent as we see today has been configured into its present fashion by colonial powers that have set up a whole social, cultural, financial, religious, educational infrastructure to achieve colonial goals. So the youth today, as well as the adults today, have inherited this infrastructure. So the message I have to the youth, and in the U.S., it's not colonialism, but it's neo-slavery. The diasporans are living with the inherited infrastructure that's designed to serve the interests of enslavers. In a way, it all looks progressive and productive because you have big buildings, you have neon signs, you have all these accoutrements that suggest to you, we're really getting somewhere. We're really making progress. So I say to the diaspora as well as to the continental African people that to a certain extent this is all Hollywood sets where your characters in a production that can be portrayed as blockbuster movies, but they're not real. So I would say we have to begin to take on the serious challenge of first admitting to ourselves that we're in and on a Hollywood set. And what does that mean? We can play these roles as well as we like, but at the end of the day, you're still going to leave the set, you're going to go home, and the set is going to make money, and you're going to be deprived. Now, it's hard to admit that to yourself, because a lot of people have invested a lot of time and energy in getting this starring role on their job or in politics, and so now you're a star. But I say you're still a star in the movie. You're not a star in what we call real life. Nor are you liberated, nor are you free. So I would say to young people here and everywhere that we have to admit and be objectively honest and coldly objective with ourselves. That if young people, as you see yourself struggling, or what you consider to be struggling, and you analyze why you're struggling because in Hollywood, everybody can't be the marquee star. There's only a few people like that. And you're going to always be a walk-on character. You're not actually in this movie. Nobody cares what you're saying. You have no dialogue. You're just a backdrop so that the star has something to point to. You're nothing in the whole scheme of things. And so you have to step outside of that and analyze and look at it and find out what's wrong with this, because it's a systemic problem. And your individual effort, unless it's geared towards the systemic problem, you're just a prop. And that's all you're going to be. And you get old and you die, and that's it. So in the U.S., I say the same thing. You have to try to step out. So the things that we try to do are efforts to step out from this. One of the biggest critiques about the community center that Nana received was the allegation that the community center was a government project because Nana was in a position to get perks from the government. And so it was the government that was building this building. It wasn't the people that were doing it. And he must be corrupt in some way. They just don't know how it is because nobody could do that, something like this. So we've proven that with a big project and a lot of small contributions, you can get the big project done. And I would say to young people too, young people tend to do this through music a lot. But in a way, I think they get co-opted along the process.
Yeah.
Because their music can create paradigm shifts. That the people that see the paradigm shift, they just buy the control out from under the person that's making it happen. So what I mean by paradigm shift, now this was the first two-story building in this area. So to build it, people came from everywhere to work on it because it was going to be a two-story building. They wanted to be involved in it.
A part of it, yeah.
And so this was something that we did because we wanted to do it. So where's the paradigm shift? So the paradigm shift came unsolicited. As soon as we built a two-story building, Nana and the family built a three-story building right behind here. And when you come to our Tonquar right now, every construction you pass is a two-story building. So as soon as you see somebody do something, you say, if they can do that, we can do that too.
Yep.
And so that's what we need. We need things that when they're done, they encourage and almost force other people to either replicate that or go beyond that, because it's just breaking the mold that you're comfortable with, and you want to see somebody do it. And if they do it, you say, well, that's my brother, so if he can do that, of course I can do that. And if he can do it, I can do it. So these to me are the kinds of things we're asking young people to think about. What can you do that will be outside of the structure, and don't let it be co-opted so early, because once that happens, someone else capitalizes big on your idea. So you have to hold on to that idea long enough for it to grow into its maturity, and don't just take the first big buck offer, because that's not a big buck to the person that's making the offer. It's only big to you because they can see the potential in your creativity or the masterful nature of your idea. They can see what it could do, and if you give it away too early, there's no fruit on the tree yet. And so you've given away the tree, and you've given away all the future fruit too. So, and then, you can't do it all by yourself. So I say it's people like ourselves. We have dropped the ball. We have unfortunately contributed to the idea that young people can get over by just watching some of their adult models, because we've done things that are self-centered. You're not thinking about anybody else. You're just thinking about you. And since you hit it big and you get something done, you want the notoriety, then you encourage young people to try to replicate that. But you're not thinking about anybody. Like I wasn't thinking about the community center at all. I was thinking about me, what I can do to shield myself is the whole point of chieftaincy. But once you realize that, do you have the maturity and you're humble enough to say, I was wrong. I was wrong. And my intentions weren't pure at the outset. But as soon as I recognized that, I admitted that. And so you change course, And now you have to be focused on what are you going to do to really help other people. Because like you guys, you're creative enough, you're hardworking enough, you listen well enough that you know right now that with the resources available to you, you could do very well in Ghana and think about nobody except yourself. You already figured out you could do that.
Yes.
The building's standing there, you can't even explain how this happened. So you will have no credibility. So you keep doing that because it's your way of vetting older people. You know, well, they ain't about nothing because they can't even answer simple questions about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't answer a simple question about yourself, how are you going to give me advice? So you have to dismiss them.
Yes, indeed.
So we move on to the next person. These questions are important. They make nice interview, but they're also probing because you're trying to find out, is the person I'm talking to worth listening to? Mm-hmm. They're not worth listening to, don't talk to them anymore. Move on to somebody that's worth listening to. So that's my story for the day.
Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you too.
And you're setting an examples too. So other people are following you because you never know who's watching you.
Mm-hmm.
But you can be for sure that somebody's watching you.
Yep.
More people than you know
Mm-hmm.
are watching how you go about things, how dependable you are, how predictable you are, how accomplished you are, and what is your standard for the things that you do. People are watching this because we're all looking for the next Stephen Curry or the next this person or the next example of that because we know they're serious.
Mm-hmm.
So you're serious too. And so young people will be watching you.
Thank you.
And they'll mimic what they see you doing because they can see that it produces something. So everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon when the parade comes by because everybody's cheering on the parade. So if you jump on the float, it's like you're in it too.
Yeah.
So that's it. So this is good.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you. Good.